Hey guys, Deathslayer Magic here, and it's time for MTG Mistakes Part 14. That's right, we're on 14. This is the longest running series I've ever done. But then again, if you take lighting a picture of Emrakul on fire with, I'm not even going to say what chemicals I used, and compare it to telling people how to play Magic better, well, I could see why this is a little bit more popular. Although, 97% of my viewers are male, according to Google, and blowing stuff up is kind of our thing, so it might be a little closer than I thought. Either way, it's time to tell you how to fix the number one most screwed up thing that most people do. That's right, this is like, there's nothing even in a close distant second. Like, second place for the thing that people most often do incorrectly is like 37 light years away from this. If you are new to Magic or if you've been playing for a while and you don't consider yourself an absolute top-level deck building expert, I guarantee you are getting this wrong. People just don't know how to do the math related to this, so they just say, screw it, take a guess, and you wouldn't believe what the percentage in your chance of winning drops by. It's probably double digits. Luckily, this is the simplest thing in the world to fix, as long as you understand semi-advanced probability in math. And by semi-advanced, I mean put a bunch of crap into a calculator and have the computer do it for you. That's right, you longtime fans will know where I'm going with this. We're revisiting hypergeometric distribution. And if you're just like hovering over the back button like I'm going to go watch something else, I hate math, math gives me freaking PTSD triggers. This actually is really simple. There's almost no math in it. It's almost just pure logic and counting, and like I think my niece could do it and she's 3. So let's break this down. How many lands should you put in a deck? Like, you have a deck design all built and ready to go. How many lands should you put in it? I'm gonna go all Psychic Friends hotline right now for a second and guess 2 things about your answer to that question, or how you determine the answer, I should say. First, you heard something from a friend of yours or another player and then just sort of went with it. And 2, you're not very confident that you have the right amount of lands in pretty much any one of your decks. I have overheard so many people at all different local gaming stores and tournaments and everything where they're talking, they're like, oh, I built this deck, I built elves, how many mana should I put in it? And the friend goes, 20. I heard online it's 20. For elves. And then they say, okay, I'll put in 20. That is stupid. That is completely stupid. That is so stupidly stupid. But this one's even better. This is the one I hear more often. How many lands do you think I should have? I have this many right now, and I'm not sure if it's like too many or too little. And the person says, I don't know. And so then they say, okay, I mean, I usually put in 21, so I'll just put in 21. What the hell? Magic is all about probability and math and I guess luck, but really just probability. You can't just guess a number. You can't just guess an arbitrary number and hope you get close and then just like go on assuming that you didn't damage your deck in any way. You gotta think, 21. If I put in 21 instead of 23, did I just give myself a 14% chance of losing? Like, compared to if it was 23? Yeah, you probably did. Or if you put in 24 and you actually should have 21. Or if you do the opposite, you put in 24 instead of 21. 21 would be the more appropriate number. Your odds of winning just went so far down the toilet, I don't think even a plumber could retrieve it. Okay, one more. I picked out 10 cards and I really wanted 4 of each of them, so there was only 20 slots left, so that's how many lands I put in. Oh my god, the stupidity, it burns. It burns just to think about it. So anyway, here's how you correct it. First, you need the mana cost and quantity of every single spell in your deck. So you say, okay, there's 4 1 costs, there's 8 2 costs, and there's 16 3 costs. I don't know, whatever. The 1 cost, the 2 cost, I mean, you're going to have 1 or 2 mana. If you only have 1 mana in your hand, you're probably going to mulligan unless you're running a really weird particular type of deck. So besides knowing how many of them, like if 50% of all your spells are 2 or 1, okay, keep that in mind. But other than that, disregard them. Now, let's say your deck is super 3-4 cost heavy. It's just everything costs 3 or 4, and you need to get there in a hurry because almost nothing costs 2 or 1. So the ratio of like 3 plus versus 2 and under, or 4 plus, whatever it seems to be. Like if there's just a whole bunch of 4 costs and almost no 3 costs or 2 costs and then a ton of 1 cost, okay, 4 is the magic number. That's the number you need to get to. Now, in my new deck, I need to cast to get the deck to, instead of stalling and controlling and backup win conditions, to really do what it's supposed to do, I need to get to 5 mana. There are 8 total cards in it, and it's the 2 to, resurrect a creature from the graveyard, put it straight onto the battlefield. They're those 2 cards specifically. So I need to do that at some point. So I need to, in a reasonable game, get to 5 mana. Basically, the entire rest of the deck costs 1, 2, and sort of 3. It's mostly 1 and 2. It's almost exclusively 1 and 2, actually. So 5 is the significant number I need to get to it. It's not just like, oh, I have a all 1, 2, 3 cost deck, and then there's a couple 4 costs that are nice, but they're just 4/4 flyers. It's not like, oh, I need to get out the 4/4 flyer because then I give it double strike and I win the game and that's what my deck does. No, they're just there so that you got something kind of powerful on the top end, and you don't need them to come out. It's just, oh, if you get 4 mana, cool, it's in your hand, bring it out, whatever. So then your magic number is not 4. You don't need to get to 4. You could theoretically win the game with 3. It wouldn't be ideal, obviously, but you could because everything else in your deck costs 1, 2, or 3. So then probably the magic number is 3. Now, remember what I said about 1 and 2 costs being mostly disregarded. All that's important is like the ratio, like how many spells don't cost 1 and 2 compared to spells that do. Now, your magic number is never 2. Let's say you've got a ton of 1 costs and like 12 2 costs, and that's it. Your number can't be 2 because in the same turn, you'll probably want to cast a 2 and a 1. I mean, come on. If your deck has a ton of 4 cost cards in it, you're not going to want to spend 8 mana realistically in a turn. I mean, it would be nice, but that's not a good idea, and it's not a good strategy to push for. So 4 is the number. You're not saying, oh boy, I really need to get out 2 giant 4/4 flyers for 4 on the same turn. Come on, be real. I mean, even if your entire deck costs 1, the whole thing, the number isn't 1, it's probably about 3, because, if they board wipe, or if you're going draw heavy, which you better, you're going to burn your hand out, you want to bring out 3 1 costs on the turn. The number's always basically 3, 4, or 5, maybe 6 if you're pushing it, but I'll tell you later why 6 is not a good number. So now that you got the magic number, and it can't be a fraction, by the way, either. It can't be 3.5, where you're like, oh, there's a ton of 3 costs and a ton of 4 costs. They're all super important. I need to get them out. Well, you need to get the 3s out. Great, you got that covered. You need to get the 4s out, and 3.5 mana won't get you there because that's not a real thing that could happen. You're basically at 3 is what you're saying. And 3 isn't good enough to cast the 4s, and you just said you need the 4s, so the number is 4. So hopefully you guys get that. So pick out the magic number that you need to get to as fast as humanly possible in your deck. So once you've got that magic number, let's put it into an example. Now this example is utterly ridiculous on purpose. Let's say you have a deck where it literally has 0, 1, and 2 costs. It has nothing but 3 costs and up, but the majority of the cards cost 3, and they're all really super important. It's like Reflector Mage and the 9,000 other clones of him or something. God, that would be, oh my god. Anyway, that's the deck. So you need to have 3 mana on turn 3, or you're doing nothing. Those decks suck, by the way. I've built them. They're terrible. I hate them. But let's use that as an example. So the number would probably be, let's say it's literally nothing but 3 costs. The whole deck is 3 costs. That's really, really simple. You need to get to 3. Once you're at 3, you're good, and pushing for 6 so that you can summon 2 3 costs that late in the game is just stupid and unrealistic and unnecessary, so the number is 3. So you go over to your hypergeometric calculator and you put in, population size 60, then you put in number of successes in population, we'll just say 21 lands because that's always a good baseline to start with. Sample size is 10 because you're going to draw 7 at the start of the game, hopefully keep them. You never really calculate in mulliganing, you just assume it's going to work, and then I'll get into mulliganing later probably. Maybe. So that's 7 plus 3 draws. So turn 3, your third turn, not the total cycle, or if your opponent goes first, not that. It's your third turn. You'll have drawn 3 cards total at the start of that turn, sort of. So the number of successes that you require is 3, which is, 3 lands. Lands are considered successes, and that's the number of successes in the population is 21 lands. Your probability of pulling 3 or a number greater than 3, because 3 is good and higher than 3 is fine as well, because of course 4 lands will pay for a 3 cost spell, no problem. Your probability is 76.1% of that happening, or as I like to call it, approximately a 24% chance that you won't get your third land out onto the field, so in your hand, out onto the field, whatever, until a time later than turn 3. So some of you are saying, oh my god, I have a 3+ heavy deck and I have 21 lands in it right now because somebody told me to always put in 21 lands in every single deck ever. Well, guess what? You're getting mana screwed in 24% of your games, which is about 1 in 4. If you need your deck to get to 3 lands by turn 3, you need it. Like, it has to happen, or you are drawing dead and doing nothing and discarding. I would say that 24 lands is a more appropriate number. That results in an 85.5% chance of getting the lands that you need on time. And remember, of course, to win a round, you only need to win 2 out of 3 games. So getting completely shut down and mana screwed and utterly obliterated 15% of the time is fine. You can lose 15% of your games. That's fine. And there's no guarantee that you lose because of this. So let's say you have to go all the way to turn 6. That's your initial 7 plus 6 more. That's a sample size of 13 draws. Now here's the thing. 24 out of 60 cards being lands is a really high land percentage. I mean, that's almost every other card. Almost. 6 more and you'd have 50% land. So what if you get to 3 and now you just need, creatures and spells? Well, you still got an enormous land percentage in your deck. So 40% of your deck is land. That's 24 divided by 60 is 40%. So 40% of the cards you draw for the rest of the game are going to be lands. So over 10 turns, you will draw 4 additional lands and 6 creatures or spells that you actually need. So you don't want to go too high with it, which is why building a deck that absolutely needs to get to 3 mana on turn 3 or needs to get to 4 mana on turn 4 because your entire deck basically costs 4, it's a bad idea. So it's like, hooray, you put enough lands into your deck that reliably on turn 4, like 90% of the time, and then for the entire rest of the game, you're going to draw so many lands you'll lose the game. It just doesn't work. Now here's how you improve it. Now you're probably way ahead of me on this if you're smart. Scrying, drawing, pretty much anything else artificial, anything but shuffling. Like anytime when you look at a card on top and either put it into your hand or say, oh, that's not what I need and put it on the bottom, it's the exact same probability-wise as pulling a card. So let's say you're running that same exact deck where you have to get to 3. That's just what you have to do. But you only want to have 22 lands in there because you want closer to 1 in 3 cards to be land because you can't be just pulling land late game or you'll lose. Actually, for ease of calculation, let's say you're a complete mental patient and want to put in 20 lands, but they're all temples. You guys remember the temples, right? They're lands that come in tapped and then it says scry 1. So all 20 of the lands are temples. So now you've got your initial 7 cards. Plus you drew 3 times because it's turn 3. You of course have a 91.6% chance of drawing 2 lands in that time or more. So you probably have 2 lands and you probably played them on turn 1 and 2. That's 2 extra scries. That's a total of 12 shots at the land, so that's an enormous 84.7% chance of working and only about a 15-ish% chance of failing. And that's with just 20 lands. I mean, 20 lands is insane. But that's the power of scrying in an extreme example. That's why all the modern decks you see run like Anticipate, for example, or even like just Gitaxian Probe or Expedite or, those types of things. Maybe even Slip Through Space, just basically spells where you do something, who cares, throw away the card, spend, 2 life, 1 mana, whatever you want, and then you basically get 1 extra bonus turn worth of not pulling crappy stuff you don't need. Now here's the thing. There's a card in Standard right now that costs 1 blue, 1 colorless, it's an instant, and it lets you basically super scry 5. And instead of going to the bottom of your deck if you don't want them to go to the graveyard, so it's not even really like a super scry, it's pretty much just a scry. That's like fixing your next 5 turns. If I had $1 for every time I played that card, flipped up 5 cards and said, wow, 5 more lands, or 3 lands and 2 spells I don't need, or I already have 2 of these in my hand and just ditched like 4 or 5 of them, I just saved myself 4 turns of the game. I mean, most games are won in Standard. Just in general, like turns, 7 to probably 13-ish. It's a lot more now, obviously, because people are playing super slow delay. And of course, my deck wins on turn 4 all the time. But in general, decks as a whole tend to win somewhere in that window. So if normally you'd only get 11 turns before your opponent wins, and you just gave yourself an extra 5 worth of, predicting the future and fixing it, that's pretty good. And you have to take that into account when it comes to the land percentage. I've seen people where they're like super scry heavy, and then they don't cut the number of lands. They're like, oh, I need to scry. Okay, I put in like 1 billion scries. And then they're like, oh my gosh, my converted mana cost in the deck is 3.4 on average total, so I'm going to put in 24 lands. Not with that level of control. I mean, come on. So the 2 things to remember, just to review, are what number do you have to get to, and how many additional chances do you get to fix it? Here's the problem. I made 1/3 of the deck, the entire land count basically. I made it the scry card. Normally it's not the lands. I mean, temples are illegal anyway. Man, those things cycled out ages ago. Let's say you have contingency plan, which lets you scry 5. And then you have like one other card that lets you scry 2. So there's 8 total in the deck. That means that your probability by turn 3, which, it's still, oh, my magic number is 3, so it's all based on your magic number. Turn 3, turn 3, turn 3, 3 mana. I need 3 mana on turn 3. And obviously, if you need 4 mana, you can't do that before turn 4, unless there's ramping. And this is really simple. If there's ramping, if you have an Elvish Mystic in your deck or whatever, count it as a land. Done. It's that simple. It's +1 mana. The end. I mean, yeah, you might have to skip a turn and haste and blah, 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 whatever. Who cares? That's virtually irrelevant to the math. So anyway, you've got a 79% chance of pulling 1 or more of a copy of 8 cards if they're in a 60-card deck by turn 3, which is 7 total pulls, not counting mulligans, of course, plus 3 turns. So you've got 4 cards that scry 5, then you got 4 cards that scry 2, so that's an average scry between all of them of 3.5, which is mighty unfortunate because it's not a whole number. So we'll be pessimistic and roll it down to 3 flat. So you have an 80% chance of getting an average of a 3 extra turn advantage. Well, how do you add that in? I have no idea. I am not that good at probability, and I don't remember that because I think it was in 8th grade. But if I remember correctly, you basically just multiply them because, 80% of the time you're going to have a 3.5 is what the number actually is. A 3.5 turn advantage because of scrying at, 3.5 extra shots at getting what you need, not a full turn advantage. So you just take 3.5, multiply it by 0.8, and at any given time, whether it's true or false, before you know the result, you can expect a total chance of 2.8. So in general, you improved your deck's amount of shots at the card you need by 2.8. So we'll just round it up to 3. So let's go plug that back in now that we know, okay, we've got 8 scries that are worth on average 3.5, and there's an 80% chance of starting the game with them, or pulling them by turn 3. So it's, of course, 60 the population size, 22 lands, which is the amount that we want to put in, because that's a nicer number, and I honestly forgot at the start of this what I said was the number. And then the sample size is 7 initial cards, 3 draws by then, and then 2.8, so basically 3 additional draws in the scrying because you assume to have been pulling them. So in any one game, or overall in 1,000 cumulative games, you would be expected to, with the scry cards considered, have your 3rd mana on turn 3 at a 93.36% chance. That's not bad at all. That's well above what you need to win. Now, you absolute top-level math experts are already typing down in the comments, if you're considering that you pulled one of the scry cards, that means that you didn't pull a land during the turn that you pulled the scry card. But I've done the math. It's so, not important of a number. It knocks it down by, 1% or something. Just disregard it and just keep the math easy. And if you just punched your screen and said, oh my god, you lost me 10 minutes ago, this isn't easy, just watch the video again, and I think the second time, now that you kind of know where I'm going with it, you'll be able to follow along and say logically, oh, I get it. I see what he means. Okay, I can do this now. And remember, like I said, it doesn't have to be scry. It could just be draw. Draw is just as good because scry is like, oh, cool, it's a land, leave it there. And then draw actually puts it in your hand, which actually is a little bit better because then it's out of the way and you don't have to spend one more turn to pull it. But that's another super not important, inconsequential little tiny couple percent tweak. So I just count, scrying and drawing as the same basically. Now there's one little catch on top of this because you probably thought, oh, cool, I'm going to, pick out the magic number that I need to get to in my deck or it will fail miserably. There's a second variable that is just as important, if not more important. When do you really need to get to that number? Because in my example, I kept it really simple. I need my 3rd land on turn 3 or I'm dead and my deck is doing nothing. In a normal deck, you could probably, ride 2 mana for a couple turns with, some 2-cost removal, 1-cost bounce, or some kind of counter spell, negate, whatever. You could buy yourself some time if you have 2 mana on the field. And realistically, you could probably take 3 more turns of not drawing land and then still have a reasonable chance of winning the game, basically. Plus, in that example I gave, I almost was going to make this like somebody pick out the logical fallacy in that entire thing, but I think you guys would hate me if I made you overthink this and listen to it 50 times. How am I going to cast my spells that let me scry if every single card in the deck costs 3 and up and I'm not at 3 lands yet? I can't cast them yet. So I thought this would be completely needless to say, but I probably should say it. Make sure that your scry and draw cards that you're considering are under the number of lands that you need to get to, not over it. I don't care if you're running Dragonlord's Prerogative and it's like, oh cool, draw 3. Oh, and I have 4 of them in my deck. Cool, that's a really good odds of getting 3 more shots at it. No, it costs 6. You can't cast it. If you're just going for lands, that means you don't have the lands to cast the spell, so you can't count the draw as 3. You have to completely ignore them because they're above the magic number. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, okay, so there's a really easy way and a really hard way to do this. It's just, I forgot what they call it, like a branching tree, something, success, failure, probability, tree thing. I don't freaking know. Well, let's start completely over at the beginning. Okay, you got a 60 card deck. You got 22 lands in there. You want to get 3 by turn 3. So you got sample size of 7, which is your initial draw. I need to stop saying that. You guys probably get that by now. And then the 3 cards you would draw on turn 1, 2, and 3. So 10 shots at it. You need 3. You want to get to 3. But realistically, your deck has 1 and 2 costs in it. So your probability of having 3 or more lands in your hand and so on the field in the middle of turn 3 is 79.6%. So we'll just say 80%. So 80% of the things that could happen in all possible branches of reality are successes. So 80% of the time you already succeeded. It doesn't matter what the rest of your deck contains. So 20% of the time you're going to fail. Now erase everything in the probability calculator and count the number of 1 and 2 cost spells that are not completely useless potato cards. If you have a 2 cost counter spell that will just completely nuke the person's creature when they summon it, I'd consider that buying a turn. I mean, that's pretty good. If you have a card that says buy 1, get 1 free hot dogs over at the food court, I don't think that would slow down your opponent to the point where you would be like, oh, they brought something out, I removed it, yay, we're even, I bought myself a turn. All you actually bought yourself was 2 hot dogs. And even though they are deeply discounted hot dogs, you're going to lose the match. So just go through all your 1 and 2 costs and say, oh yeah, they bring out a creature or something, and this is a 2/2 for 2, or it's a 2/1 for 1, or so. It's a creature that could potentially block them, so they probably won't swing, or will trade. Them not swinging or you two trading are both considered you buying yourself another turn because you're no longer 1 swing closer to losing life total wise. Then get that total number together and put that into the calculator. Now, an actual example of something that, you would not consider to be a good card is like a 2 cost equipment. Okay, what is a 2 cost equipment going to do for you? Nothing. You can't block with it. It doesn't stop them from doing anything. It's just equipment. You summon it. It sits there. It does nothing to stall out the game or prevent you from losing. Or more specifically, preventing your opponent from progressing. Or let's say it's a 1 or 2 cost spell that is your like game-winning combo, or that starts a really big thing, or it's like a boost card. Well, what's a boost card going to do for you? Now, a kill card, there you go. A creature, definitely. That's out on the battlefield that can block. So you get the idea. Let's say there's 14 cards in the deck total that I would consider to be good. Like they can stall out the game to the point where it actually did something. So population size 60, number of successes in population 14, sample size 10 because we're talking about turn 3. And turn 3 is considered to already be a failure because now we're in that 20%. We're in the 20% that's already a failure, so you did not pull the lands that you need. So it's inclusive of turn 3. So it's like, how screwed am I on turn 3? Will I still be able to do something? And that something is a 1 or 2 cost spell that does something. So your probability of pulling 1 card that does something is 94.5%, so very high. But in 3 turns, I don't think 1 is going to stop them. So we'll just say 2 would be nice, and that's a 74% chance. Not too bad. If you want to go 3 for 3, where you're holding 3 cards that you could just go 1, 2, 2 cost, on turn 1, 2, and 3, and just drop them right in a row because you're screwed on lands and you only have 2 lands, 42.6%, so less than 50-50, so that's pushing it a little bit. And honestly, it usually only takes like 1 removal spell in a creature or 2 creatures, to just sit there and kind of stall out the battlefield for quite a while, because remember, your opponent probably didn't start with the ideal, like, perfect gift of a opening hand. They probably don't have 3 creatures, 3 mana, and a kill spell or something, for example. They're probably just as screwed as you are. So if we stick to 2, that means that if you didn't get to 3 lands, you have we'll just say 75% chance of bringing out 2 things that will stop the game. So either like a really good 2 cost, go for the throat, kill spell, something like that. should probably say ultimate price, because that's a card that's actually legal in standard right now. And then you've got like a 1/1 Spirit Flyer, so he can block anything, and then you've got a kill spell. So you can shut down the opponent and stop them doing from, what they're doing, assuming they're not running a combo glass cannon, freaking mill deck or some stupid thing. They're playing normal Magic with normal creatures trying to hit you. Well, that means that 80% of the time you're going to succeed, 20% of the time you're going to fail, except that 74, so we'll just say 75% of that 20% you're going to succeed. Or at least you'll be moderately okay because you'll have 2 things out. So 75% of the remaining 20% is, of course, 15, which means that 80% of the time you're going to get the lands you need. If you don't get the lands, then an additional 15 overall total, like global percent of the time, you're going to be covered with some 2 costs and 1 cost. So 5% of the time, you're not going to have 3 lands or 2 and 1 costs. You're going to have like nothing but cards above 2, like ones that cost 3, 4, and 5. 5% is 1 in 20 games. No problem. You're in the clear. Your deck is good to go, especially if some of the 1 and 2 costs also carried scries, because then you could scry yourself closer to a 2 or 1 cost spell, or closer to a land that you actually need to get to 3. So this is obviously why if you run all the numbers and change it to 4, you just have to get that Phyrexian Obliterator, which costs 4. You gotta get that out as soon as possible, preferably turn 4, 5, or 6. Your odds of being able to do that are completely stupidly impossible unless you put in like 30 lands out of 60. So just give up on that deck idea is where I'm going with that. It'll never happen. And that's why in Magic the Gathering, more powerful cards cost more. You can't put too many of them in your deck or you won't get to that amount of mana, and you can't put too little in the deck or you'll never draw them in the first place. And at a certain point, you're just being unrealistic and violating like probability itself. So this cascading probability calculation where you just say, okay, how many lands are appropriate for the deck? You just go through all of it real quick. It honestly takes 15 seconds tops. I mean, this video is like 30 minutes, but it takes 15 seconds to do. You just run through the whole calculations with 21 and just be like, those are pretty crappy odds. I got a 60% chance of winning and a 40% chance of just stalling out and completely sucking. Now I upped it to 22. It's better. It's not bad. Then I upped it to 23, which of course lowered the number of other spells in the deck. So, at a certain point, the probability is going to go negative. Well, or not negative percentages. I mean, it's going to drop. You can't add another land and actually see an advantage for it. And that's how you arrive at the perfect number. So whatever is the highest acceptable probability, that's what you should put in. And then remember, under the gap of failures that you already created, make sure that you calculate how many outs you have. I guess that's what poker players usually refer to it as. So if I'm not doing what I need, if I'm not drawing these on time, if I can't put the combo together, if I can't get the lands out, then what percentage of the remaining failures would be acceptable outcomes that might stall out the game enough that I can keep going? And then also consider the number of, potential hits you can get in your deck that are like Scry 2 and give you 2 extra shots at it. So if 10% of your deck is exactly Scry 2, and of course your magic number is 3 lands by turn 3, then in that failure gap, 68% of the time you're going to pull one of those scry cards. Now, like I said, there's a flaw in this math, and the reason there's a flaw in this math is 1, because it's really, really, really tiny and insignificant most of the time, and 2, because I don't know how to do that math. It's like the whole idea of exclusion, or I forgot the term even for it. How bad is that? You can't have both outcomes happen. And to factor that in, it becomes like geometrically hypergeometric, and you gotta do like all this crap to get it to work. So just ignore it. Just say that getting to 3 land and not getting to 3 land are binary, and if one happens, then the other doesn't happen, and if one doesn't happen, then the other does happen, and that's that. You can't mix, and there's no exclusion, and etc. Trust me, it'll make your numbers a little bit less accurate, but your life a lot easier. So I really didn't want to make this video because I knew it would go super long and it would be super complicated, but hopefully you guys followed along, and it is the most important thing that you can ever do when planning a deck, is get the number of lands correct, and then at the same time, I mean, obviously the whole scope of this video was getting the number of lands down to like an amount, but you can use hypergeometric calculations to say what's the probability of pulling these 8 cards along with these 6 cards, because I need one of the 8 and one of the 6 to make a combo that wins the game. So by turn 10, what is my probability of having both of them in my hand if I have 12 scry cards? And you could do that and then just disregard the lands, do all the land calculations separate and first, and then nail down the number of scry cards that you need, and then the number of combos, or individual combo components I should say. So I bet you're all wondering this. Yes, I do this to all my decks, every single one of my decks. So that's when I give the really simplified version of this, which is this is the number you need. You need 2 of these, 3 of these, 4 of these, 4 of these, and 3 of these. This is what you need to have in the deck. Just trust me. And other people say, you should take out this creature and put in Bedlam Reveler. It would be, quote, better. Gee, thanks for the clever insight that I totally didn't run through the calculations and eliminate like 3 hours ago. So I'm not saying like I absolutely hate it when people say, you know, take my perfect deck that took hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of math and planning to get just absolutely perfect and have the best possible probability down to the last 0.1% of drawing exactly what you need when you need it. And somebody comes in and says, haha, get rid of these 3 cards and throw these 4 in that cost way more and don't do anything near what you thought they did. Your deck will be so much better and you're wrong. But, you know, if people do that, I kind of want to take everything that you own and care about and light it on fire. So next time I post a deck list, it's already been through all this math, so hey, there you go, no problem. Take my word for it that it's the ideal deck list. And otherwise, hopefully these calculations and this overall method of determining, you know, what percentage of the time your deck will work and what percentage it won't will help you guys out when you're building your own decks, and you won't, you know, accidentally build a deck that just stalls out 30% of the time, and it's really subtle as to why unless you just do the calculations. So if you have any further questions, leave them below, and I will try my best to answer them. And keep in mind, I really had no interest whatsoever in advanced probability, but now that I play Magic, I kind of had to relearn some of it, but I was too lazy to relearn all of it. Also, obviously, the link to the calculator I used is down in the description, so bookmark the crap out of that. And I will see you guys next video.